Well, hello. Welcome back to Toy Thursday with Johnny Tiger on Thursday, August 26, 2021. Some people looking at this and thinking, is it Halloween already? Well, no, not quite. So why are we looking at a werewolf? This actually has a lot to do with our character of the day. And no mistake about it, there's only going to be one, but I hope I can devote enough time to talk about him to do him justice. Because I really know very little about this character, the design, the books, and stuff like that. But I will make a valiant attempt nonetheless, because I believe it is a very worthwhile series of books to talk about. But first, let's say let's talk about werewolf a little bit. I did not know anything about werewolf when I was growing up, and werewolves are not a part of Chinese culture, Chinese mythology, or horror story. Just like vampire. Vampire is not really a Chinese thing. I mean, we have equivalents of vampire, just like we have equivalents of uh, animals and people that can shape shift into other things. But the concept of a person turning into a wolf creature and terrorizing and killing on the full moon, night when the moon is full, that is not part of the Chinese storytelling. The first time I heard about a werewolf was when I went to Miami for my eye surgery. I think I was 7 years old, or yeah, I think I was seven. And my stepmother Maria did all she could to terrorize me and psychologically traumatize me around the time of the surgery. My nanny Maru and my stepmother Maria were the only two people who went with me to Miami. The first time I ever got out of Taiwan to go to another country was to Miami, and I don't have a lot of fond memory of that trip because most of that was the eye surgery, and which didn't work out, by the way, as if we need to say that you guys already know that it didn't work. If it worked, I probably wouldn't be here making video today. Um, but anyway, that aside, while I was recovering from the surgery, my stepmother Maria, who had fair knowledge of English language and English culture, terrorized me with all kind of tall tales uh, and uh, stories from Western culture. And one thing she told me about was werewolf. She said here in Miami, you got to be very, very quiet at night because sometimes when the moon is full, people turn into giant wolves and they come out and eat children. And uh, since you can't see, you wouldn't even see them coming. Yeah, it really scared me, you know. Like, I mean, now when you think about it now, it's kind of, like now it sounds funny. Now it's but back then it didn't sound funny at all. I was terrified. So werewolf has kind of left a very deep imprint on my childish mind way back then. And even now, werewolf is always one of my favorite horror icons. I always have a thing for animal creatures, and half animal, half human, minotaurs, centaurs, mermaids. I always have things for uh, half human, half animal creatures. So werewolf is like right up my alley, and maybe because they terrorized me so much back when I was a child. So now it's almost like a swing to the other extreme. I really dig werewolves. This werewolf in front of the camera we've seen before. He's from Deathstalker, video game Deathstalker. His name is John Talbane. He is an English werewolf. Um, Actually, for the most part, he's counted as one of the good guys. But we are not going to talk about him. We just need him to open the stage for us as we talk about today's main subject. A guy who devoted his life in killing creatures such as John Talbane and all the other creatures of darkness. And no, I'm not talking about Trevor Belmont of Castlevania, although it's not far from that. Now, we have talked about many of the uh, leading champions of the fantasy novels: Lord of the Ring, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, uh, and Conan the Barbarian, and Stephen King's Dark Tower. And we are slowly, gradually winding this series down. Pretty soon we'll be moving on to a new subject. But before we close this topic, there are a few honorable mentions. A few years ago, just as I thought, I have read all the worthy uh, fantasy novels there is to read. A friend of mine, very good friend, Remy Chartier, uh, who have collaborated with me on various sound and music uh, subject and project. Uh, the upcoming Johnny Tiger documentary, the theme song you guys will hear at the end, will be produced and instrumentalized by my good friend Remy. So Remy mentioned this book to me that I have never heard of, but it's right up my alley. It's about a guy who travel around uh, dealing with supernatural horrors, saving people, while struggling with his own inner demons. This was the reason I never heard of this was written by a Polish author, and uh, it wasn't until later that it got translated into English for English readers. But first, let's go back to its humble beginning. In 1986, a Polish short story was submitted to a fantasy magazine by a very lesser known Polish author by the name of Andrzej Sapkowski. I'm sorry if I butchered the name, but it is kind of hard to pronounce. I think it's pronounced Sapkowski or something similar to that. Uh, but the first name is Andre. That part I'm sure. Andrei Sapkowski submitted the first ever Witcher story to a small Polish fantasy magazine. I wonder if he knew back then how much this would grow, how big this would end up growing. Now, about 35 years later, The Witcher spans five novels and a whole slew of short stories, and it has even spawned a series of very impressively made video games, some comic books, and this year it has become its own TV series on Netflix. And now, perhaps no surprise, it is getting some action figure treatment by the king of action figures, Todd McFarlane. I know. A lot of people say he is no longer the king of action figures. And really, there are a lot of people, a lot of companies that make better action figures than Todd McFarlane today. But I remember the McFarlanes in the 90s. I remember back when everyone else was making uh, action figure for children. Todd McFarlane was the first person to make bigger, better, more detailed, more gruesome, adult-oriented action figures. He tested the boundary every step of the way, In the 90s, he was the king of action figures. In the 90s, his comic book outsold DC and Marvel. So to me, who grew up in the 80s and 90s, Todd McFarlane will always be the king of action figures, if not anymore, but at least worth that honorarium, just for old time's sake. So Todd McFarlane has now taken over the Witcher action figure license and producing. He has produced a few of them already, and more are coming. So we will definitely come back and visit more Witcher characters in the future. But today, I just want to introduce you guys to Gerald or Geralt or Geralt, depending on who you listen to. I'm just going to say Gerald because that's what the spelling looks like to me. Gerald of Rivia, the hero, the Witcher of um, Andrei Sapkowski's Witcher series. In the world that Gerald comes from, he was born roughly around 12th century, uh, medieval time. Yeah. And the story goes that every so often, some very talented children, mostly male children, would get taken away by this secret organization, the School of Magic and Combat, Witcher Academy. In other words, the school would teach the child to become uh, extremely good at swordsmanship, martial art, uh, any kind of combat, and would teach them basic magic. But more than that, the school would subject the child to inhumane experimentations with potions and alchemies and powders and drugs, trying to instill superhuman abilities into them. Most of the children end up dying during these experiments. The ones that actually survived ended up being mutated. They become effectively immortal. They age very slowly. They heal from things that would kill a normal human. They have a bit of a superhuman strength. They have superhuman speed, and their features become mutated, such as Gerald of Rivia, we can see in front of the camera. Gerald is a tall, rather lean-looking individual with pale white skin, milky white hair, and rather shocking-looking ulcer colored eyes. I don't know quite what ulcer is. I think it's a shade of green or red or something. Yeah, blind guy doing action figure review. What do you expect? Well, anyway, uh, Gerald look mutated. He has scars on his face. I don't know if you guys can see him clearly. Let me get him a little bit closer to the camera. Scars on his face, and he is dressed in very detailed looking chainmail armor with little bits of plating here and there on his tall and very, I wouldn't say strong looking, but definitely very lean. He looked like someone who can move fast, which he definitely can. Where he's depicted in uh, video games and other media, when you see Gerald fight, he's like he's dancing and just very graceful, very fluid. Definitely befitting the status of a blade master, which he is. He is one of the best swordsmen in his world. Most of the witchers are very, very good with their blades, and so what do these witchers do? The Witcher, after they pass their exams and win their sword, they have to win their armor, they have to deserve those equipment. After they win the equipment after they survive the mutation. They are set upon the world. So the Witcher basically part of the mutation makes them uh, infertile, so they're unable to father offspring, but they also, like I said, they live longer than normal humans. They're almost immortal. Um, their job is to go around the world and look for supernatural threats. So they go from village to village, they go from kingdom to kingdom, and if there's a dragon here that need to be dealt with, if there's a zombie infestation that need to be put down, or if there's a werewolf that need to be killed off, the Witcher show up and deal with it. So Gerald is the Witcher. He's not just one of the Witchers. He's the Witcher. He's one of the best. Uh, and for most of the adventure, you just follow his footstep as he go from land to land, having little adventures, kind of like Conan the Barbarian. He drifts around, having little encounters here and there, run into different dilemmas, and deal with supernatural threats such as wizards and witches and werewolves. Speaking of werewolves, Gerald here is actually carrying the head of a werewolf in his hand, a freshly killed werewolf. Now, how cool is that? Let me hold this up so you guys can see. This thing is like really gruesome. You can see the black hair and then the brown and red splotches on the and all over the face. The tongue is sticking out. You can see the sharp teeth, giving you a view of the profile. You can see that it's actually bigger than Gerald's own head. I hold it next to his own head. Uh, so this was a large creature. And then, of course, the stump of the neck where his blade cut off the head. And then there's the rope around the head so he can carry it like a trophy. Very gruesome, very cool. Yeah, this is not a Witcher that is ready for combat. This is a Witcher that is already done his job. And so the way I have him posed, you can see his arms up like he just sheathed his sword, and he's carrying this severed werewolf head in his other hand. Gerald carries two swords on his back. One of them is silver and one of them is steel. He uses the steel sword to fight off human threat when he have to deal with bandits and invaders and highwaymen or assassins. He uses the steel sword. And when he's dealing with supernatural threat, then he uses the silver sword. Right? I think vaguely remember there's some kind of explanation why he can't just use one for two purposes. Well, I mean, it's obviously if you can't use steel sword against supernatural threat because that doesn't do anything. But why can't he use silver sword to fight human? I think there was some kind of explanation that it would damage the rooms, the magical rooms on the sword, or something like that. Or maybe silver is not a good metal to use against other people using steel sword, something like that. I can't remember all the details. But anyway, he carried these two super long swords on his back. And this is where I'm going to go into a pet peeve of mine. As an amateur fantasy book writer, author myself, and definitely very big fantasy reader, and on top of that, being a martial artist, one of my biggest pet peeve is when people depict something so incredibly ridiculous like this. I know it's fantasy. I know we shouldn't take it seriously, but to me, a good fantasy have to fall in the realm of physics. Okay, it doesn't have to be logical, but it physics have to still work to a certain degree. And what that is why It always gets me a little irritated when someone show a character carrying long sword on their back. In this case, he's not even just carrying one; he's carrying two long swords on his back. And let me show you guys why this is ridiculous. Okay? And in case you don't, in case you never thought about it, just look at the length of this sword. The length of this sword is like uh, almost two-thirds of his height. Uh, So let me pull one of these out so you guys get a kind of a idea how long this sword is. That is over 4 inches long. So in other words, in real life, this is over 4 feet long. Really long. Okay, for sword, that's really long. If Gerald was to grab the hilt of one of these swords and pull, this is as much as it's going to get out. This much, like maybe an inch of it. Uh, the sword will only go as long as his arm can reach, in which case there's no way he can draw this sword from his back. He would have to physically take the sheath off his shoulder, hold it in the other hand, and then grab the sword and pull it out, and then put the sheath back on his shoulder, and then get ready to fight. That's the only way it can work. Right? So characters that carry long sword on their back, does it look cool? Yes, it looks cool. Does it work? No, it doesn't work. And it's just something that's so trivial and so obviously against the law of physics that it offends me to no end whenever I see that in a fantasy novel or in a movie or in video game. If you uh, go back and think about all the
The
movies,
time is now
all the
9
movies
p.m.
you've watched that have people carrying sword on their back and they draw in their back, they draw the sword from their back. If you think back and you can even go back and look, they never show the entire uh, footage of the sword coming out. They show the person reaching back and then they show the sword in their hand. They never show the sword coming out because it can't be done. It just doesn't work that way. Okay? Um, Historically, people did carry the sword on their back, but only when it's ceremonial, only when it's in situations when they didn't have to fight, when they knew they didn't have to draw the sword, such as when people go and meet noblemen or royalty. Sometimes, if they must carry their sword with them, they will carry their sword at their back. This is to guarantee the safety of the royalty. So, if you are trying to draw your sword, you won't be able to draw it quickly. You have to take it off your back and then draw it from the sheath, and then by that time, the royal guard would be all over you. So, yeah, anyway, Witcher Geralt of Rivia carries two swords on his back, and I'm not going to continue to rant about that. It's just a pet peeve of mine. Uh, these two swords uh, are even sculpted differently. If when you look at this one, the top one, it's very traditional. Okay, it's got a simple cross guard and round like a diamond shaped pommel. Now I don't know which one of these is silver, which one is steel. They're both plastic. How's that? this other one, this other one has a more forward jutting crossguard, and the hilt, the pommel, makes the hilt look like almost like a piece of bone. Actually, it's like got a I don't know even know how to describe it. The hilt are two strands intertwined, which is kind of unique. But both of these were long swords. They're really long. Uh, I think they're the same length actually. Now the sheath on the back is movable. You can unplug this if you don't want it on his back. Most of this figure is regular plastic, but the torso is hollowed out soft PVC. As you can see, I can squeeze it. You put a squeaker in there, he would squeak if I squeeze him. I think I know why they did it this way because Todd McFarlane is going to release Gerald again in different armor. So doing it this way, all he has to do is replace that soft PVC part with different design. He wouldn't have to redo the whole figure. And I myself, I find this design very annoying, and this is why. Uh, on paper, Gerald looked like he's very articulated. He's supposed to have 22 points of articulation, and his elbow, his arm, wrist, leg kicking forward, leg kicking to the side, ankle, knee. All this worked fine, right? All this worked fine. But the problem with his neck joint, because his long hair kind of block his head, so he can't really look up. He can't really look up. He can't really look down either. Um, yeah, the hair just really messes up his neck joints. And the soft, squeezable PVC body make it so he doesn't really have waist joint. He can't twist to the side. And for a character that is known to be nimble and graceful and display some amazing swordsmanship, that's a problem. Geralt of Rivia need to be able to twist to the side. He need to be able to get into sword swinging poses. Um, so a lack of waist, a lack of neck is really not good in the case of this action figure. Other than that, it is a superbly made figure. I really like. He's about 7 inches tall, and he's pretty decently sized. He's not super buff or anything, but he has a bit of heft to him, and he comes with two swords, the sheaths to carry them in, and a trophy werewolf head. He also comes with a base as well, but I don't use the base. I think he stands pretty well on his own. Of course, he's going to try to prove me wrong by falling over. Design-wise, he's wearing his first set of armor. I think they call this the Viper armor, the first set of armor that he left the academy in. Uh, it's a lot of light plates and the here on the stomach and on the leg. You can definitely see that he got some chain mail going on. The chain armor, really, really cool. The texture is really nice. Like the texture here, transitioning from the plate, the chest plate, to the rough section here on the belly where the chain is, and the rough section here on the leg where the chain is. Really, really cool. I like characters. I like action figures that have very distinct textures like that. Does his face look like how Gerald is depicted? I don't know, but I know the scars on his face is well uh, painted out, and he definitely look like someone who means business. So about the only thing I can say that is negative about this figure is the soft torso. I don't like that. These soft PVC also tend to have a tendency to crack and break a few years later uh, when they dry out. So uh, I'm kind of not looking forward to that. And the neck articulation being so limited, and he had no way to turn his body to the side. Those are the only thing that kind of holding this action figure back. But otherwise, if you are a fantasy fan or Witcher fan, uh, I'd say definitely it's right out there among some of the best you can get on your shelf that can get into some really badass adventures and tussles against forces of evil. Whether McFarlane will make more monsters and villains for the Witcher to hunt. And that's a different story. So far, we have one villain, and in the next series, he's coming up with Witcher again, he had different armor, and then his stepdaughter, which so next series look like it's not going to have any bad guy. I think series three is going to have a giant for him to fight. So that's cool. So hopefully we'll eventually see actual werewolf that he can fight rather than just a werewolf head being carried on the rope. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's Toy Thursday, and if you are a fantasy fan and you have not checked out the Witcher series, do check it out. It's really, really enjoyable. Again, it's by Andrei Sapkowski, and you can find it on Google and Amazon and anywhere you find your books. Thanks again, and we'll be back again tomorrow for Fitness Friday.